A few months ago, I had to go shopping for a MIG welder. It started with I bought a car. I bought a Jeep Wrangler, which is going to require a lot of welding. More welding than mechanical work for that matter. And the MIG is really a good welder for light duty or around the car kind of work. It's actually good for trailers. There's a lot of different projects that you can probably use a MIG welder for, but my specific thought was as opposed to stick or one of the other types of welding, MIG. So I went shopping for the MIG, and we're going to do a review, and I'm not necessarily going to recommend like the machine I have here today, but also if you're shopping for a MIG, some of the things you want to think about, and that's what we're going to be doing today, episode 29 apparently. So let's talk about MIG welders. Well, hi, glad you could stop by. The MIG welder that I bought was probably as inexpensive as any. Now, most of us, including me, I wanted to go down to Harbor Freight and buy the little Harbor Freight 90. I think it's called the Chicago Electric 90 or something like that. And it's about $110, something like that. So they're really inexpensive. And I looked at the reviews and I really couldn't get a feel for the machine. Now, I've got some welding experience. I've done a lot of Miller stick welding in my time. I've used a lot of equipment in welding years ago. So the MIG welder was not really something new, but I actually had a MIG welder years ago that I sold. Sort of wished I'd kept it now, I guess. But ideally, the big problem you're going to run into with a MIG welder is the first thing you have to look at is the duty cycle. The duty cycle is going to tell you how much work that little guy can do. And a lot of people may or may not understand the aspect of a duty cycle. So this one here has a better duty cycle than the Harbor Freight 90. Not a lot better, a little better. It's around, for the setting I'm using it on, for the metal I'm doing, I'm finding that the duty cycle is approximately estimated at 35%, which is not that great. That means in 10 minutes, I can weld up to 3.5 minutes, and then I've got to let the machine sit for 6.5 minutes. Or even better, let it sit for 7 minutes. Now, when I say sit, that's a big mistake. After welding, don't reach back and shut the machine off. Leave it sitting, leave the fan running, and let it cool down. And then it's ready for the next cycle, or it's just simply in back to cool conditions. Because if you shut it down immediately, all the heat buildup inside the coil, the transformer, and what have you is trapped. And there's actually a likelihood that you'll sort of give the welder an early life. It'll die sooner. But the duty cycle is a very important thing, and you'll probably notice with most all welders out there, you will always see something that the manufacturer will say that has 40% duty cycle, whatever. The Harbor Freight 90, for example, was sort of shocked, but I guess at the same time I had a good chuckle, has a 10% duty cycle. That's low. That's actually the lowest I've ever seen. But it's fine. If you only have a little tiny bit of welding to do, you can probably make it work for you. And there's really nothing wrong with that as far as your, how much money you're going to spend to your application. The other problem I had with the Harbor Freight model was it had a high output and a low output setting, variable speed. Granted, there's some people out there right now that like to add a bridge rectifier. So they make a DC machine, because really MIG welding is DC. It really is not sort of, AC machine. An AC machine, such as probably this one right here, is a very dirty kind of weld. A lot of splatter, and a little bit inconsistent and what have you, because it's running AC. Now, back to duty cycle and the other things. This one here goes up to 130 amp. It was sold to me for about the same price as the one at Harbor Freight. And actually it was a little bit cheaper because I got free shipping with it. So it was sent right to the house. And for the trip to Harbor Freight and back, this was a cheaper way to go, and it's about the same machine, so I thought. So I thought, well, when we get it here, we'll test and we'll find out. But the other reasons I went after this one was with the high and low and the button 1, 2, you actually have 4 what I would call taps off the transformer. That's 4 settings of heat. And having more availability of different heat settings is actually really good on a MIG welder. In fact, the more you have, somewhat the better. That doesn't mean that 6 or 8's needed, but depending on what you're welding. The other end of this that you want to look at is whether you might want to have a 110 machine such as this one here, which again I was a little concerned because generally a 110 MIG welder, they're not a strong machine, and they really aren't. If you're going to weld something really thick like a pair of piece of 1/2-inch steel together or something, this is not your baby, not even close. But for light welding around like a car, these things can probably do the job, and if you're probably the better you are with the machine, the better chances you're going to have a pretty good job come out with your machine. Protection shields. The shielding is okay, I guess, but really you should buy yourself a good quality one for a couple of reasons. The first thing I noticed about it was this one here. You just tied up one of your hands, And when I'm welding, I generally like to keep both hands on the gun. Usually one to hit the trigger, and sometimes the other hand either hold on the piece or to help steady the weld, so I can get a really good penetration. And that's what it's about. Now let's get back to 110 welders. They will be all right probably up to 1/4-inch material. So if you're looking at 20 gauge, 18 gauge, 16 gauge metal, and say up to in this case 1/8 material, a welder of this nature will probably do whatever projects, whatever you need. You could go into heavier steel, which I've seen it done, but it really comes down to several things. You'd have to grind a V, you'd have to fill it in right, you'd have to be a pretty good little welder to make it work. And yes, you can do it, but the average novice that's out there that might buy a machine like this, you're probably going to have you're going to be struggling to try to get good strength and get good bonding between the two pieces of metal, say that you're trying to stitch back together. But this is the 130 starts out with what you see right here in front of you. You get the gobbledygoo. You do not get any decent gloves with it, but you have the on and off switch located right here, but you also have a tap of 1 and 2, and then a minimum and a maximum. So this basically gives you 4 heat ranges to deal with. And the duty cycle, depending on the heat you need, is going to tell you really how much work this welder can do. Right now I'm running around 4 speed, and at 4 I was welding together a pair of 1/2-inch rods. Now I can do that because I've had a lot of welding experience, and I can stitch up some pretty heavy stuff with even the lightest welder. In fact, looking back over the years, a lot of times I used to use heat between 70 and 90 amps. But 90 amps on the Harbor Freight machine, for example, would be the maximum. So really this machine offers a lot of flexibility because at a lower tap I can have 90 amps and working, and I'm not working the machine as heavily or as hard as I might have worked at a machine that's maxed out at 90 amps. So this was not a bad buy, and I've been welding with it, and I'm pretty happy so far with the results. We'll know more, I guess, down the road. So if you're out looking around to try to buy an inexpensive machine, or trying to just figure out what MIG welder do I need, take a look at the amps, the current, the amount of current work that you're going to be needing. Take a look at your duty cycle. And I would recommend take a look at some reviews on the machines, that you're, especially the specific one, like if it's a Century, Hobart, Lincoln, whatever it is. Take a look and see what reviews are out there, and see if you can figure out what size of material might the maximum size that the MIG welder might be good for. You're going to want to consider that, because if you're doing like work on like I said, trailers, even the small home trailers that we pull around behind our pickup trucks and stuff, some of those trailers can get pretty thick and pretty heavy on metal, especially if they need to be welded up, or if it's a project weld where you're putting some stuff together. You're probably going to head up towards 1/4-inch material with those trailers. And when you get to 1/4 inch, you might need, if you're not a good welder especially, but you want you want that good weld, you're going to need a little bit heavier machine possibly than this one. You're probably going to be wanting to push anywhere from about 160, you might even be looking at 200 depending on the thickness of that metal. I can do it, and I have to admit I can do it, but only because I've had a lot of experience in the background in MIG welding at one time, and I've done a lot of welding over the years. So I'm very good with knowing how to fill in a piece of metal and make that work. Anyways, that's so that's the MIG welder this week with Coffee and Tools, and hopefully it'll help you to maybe when you're shopping for a MIG welder, you sort of think a little bit more about the idea of look at duty cycle. That's going to really tell you a lot. And then consider the thickness of metals that you want to be putting together on, say, a project, a day-to-day project, whatever. And at that point, you'll be able to select maybe the current or the type of range of MIG welder you're going to need. And take a look at your shop and take the feed, because 220 is a good machine. It just will be. It's going to be a better machine than this one. This was very inexpensive, probably because it's a 110 machine. It can produce the power that I need to get the job done, but you may find it's not enough for the trailers or whatever work you might be getting into. So hopefully that'll help you a little bit with your shopping. Good luck. Have a great week, everybody, and see you next week.